to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship. He's also been a longtime and loyal friend of Christians United for Israel. In his current role, Ambassador Bolton continues to voice his opposition to the Iran deal and strengthen, as he once noted, the already deep cooperation between the U.S. and Israel, and build on our lasting partnership, demonstrated repeatedly when courage and persistence are required.
What a beautiful audience you are. It's my privilege today to introduce to you one of the great servants of the American people. He is a dear friend, someone who is in our government, who truly loves Israel, who loves truth and loves justice. In every role in which he has served, Ambassador John Bolton has steadfastly supported Israel and the Jewish people. He has worked diligently to maintain the strength of the U.S.-Israel relationship. In his current role as the Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, Ambassador Bolton continues to ensure that the relationship between the United States and Israel is both deep and sure, and that both our nations are strong and secure. Please join me in welcoming to this stage Christian United for Israel's committed ally and faithful friend, Ambassador John Bolton.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's great to be here with you today. I want to thank Pastor Hagee for those very kind words. It's been my privilege to speak before Kufi on many occasions, and none is as great today to see this crowd here in Washington. I wanted to speak to you about the relationship between the United States and Israel in the context of how President Trump has completely changed the foreign policy paradigm for the United States of America in just 2 short years. Since the president took office, he has charted a bold new course in every aspect of foreign affairs. Around the world, naive beliefs have now given way to clear-eyed common sense. We are no longer surrendering American liberty in the name of global governance. We are no longer selling out our friends to appease our adversaries. And we are no longer sacrificing the interest of the American people to pursue idealistic fantasies in Havana, Tehran, or anywhere else. Instead, we are proudly defending American strength and American sovereignty. As a result, the world is changing for the better, and the American people are safer. We can see the results of renewed American leadership in every corner of the globe, and particularly in the Middle East, that difficult neighborhood Israel calls home. Over the years, presidents and policymakers have utilized many different tools of foreign policy. They have adopted varying philosophies, tactics, and so-called doctrines. Yet, unfortunately, these strategies have too often failed to yield results. This administration, on the other hand, is guided by one simple principle. In every decision we make, we put the interests of the American people first. Since January 2017, we have applied this principle across all major issue areas. For example, we have taken direct action to protect American sovereignty and American interests in international forums of all kinds. Last June, we announced our withdrawal from the hypocritical UN Human Rights Council, which shielded the world's worst human rights violators while devoting most of its time to condemning Israel, a thriving democracy. We are also reevaluating UN peacekeeping missions, including those involving Israel, to ensure support for effective, accountable, and efficient operations. We will not allow bureaucratic inertia to keep the United States in international organizations or agreements that undermine U.S. interests and values. For these reasons, in September of last year, I announced that the United States would not fund, support, or cooperate with the International Criminal Court, or ICC. The ICC, which asserts near universal jurisdiction over the citizens of every country without their consent. As I said then, the ICC is flawed to its core, and we will let it die on its own. The court is a favored child of global governance advocates, and it has failed repeatedly in its purported aim to deter and punish egregious human rights violations. Instead, the ICC has become a forum for politicized attacks on the foreign policies of liberal democracies such as the United States and Israel. In fact, in November 2017, the ICC prosecutor requested to investigate alleged war crimes supposedly committed by American service members and intelligence professionals during the war in Afghanistan. And, at the behest of the so-called State of Palestine, the ICC has threatened to investigate Israeli housing projects, in addition to targeting Israeli counterterrorism efforts in the West Bank and Gaza. We cannot and will not allow the ICC bureaucrats in The Hague to dictate our foreign policy or that of our most trusted allies, first and foremost Israel. Accordingly, in addition to withdrawing all support for the ICC, last month we also announced a policy to restrict U.S. visas for anyone responsible for an ICC investigation of American personnel. We welcome the unanimous April 12 decision by the ICC to finally back down from the Afghanistan investigation. However, as the President noted in his statement that day, we reiterate that any attempt to target American, Israeli, or allied personnel will be met with a swift and vigorous response. In September, I also announced that the United States was closing the Palestine Liberation Organization in Washington, D.C. We have also ended funding for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine, or UNRWA. And we have cut support for the Palestinian Authority. We will not allow the PLO office in Washington to reopen until the Palestinians start direct and substantive negotiations with the Israelis. We will not support UNRWA until it uses American aid to assist people in emergency situations and stops funding those promoting hatred toward the United States of America and its citizens. And we will not restore funding to the Palestinian Authority until it stops its vile practice of paying terrorists and their families for murdering innocent American and Israeli men, women, and children. As the President has said, the United States supports Israel's absolute right to self-defense. And any future peace agreement must account for Israel's need to protect its people from Syria, Iran, and other regional threats. Peace in the Middle East need not come at the expense of American moral courage or of Israeli security. We will not allow political correctness to stand in the way of doing what is right and just. For this reason, President Trump also recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, something that seems to have escaped former presidents. And now the United States Embassy, under the able leadership of Ambassador David Friedman, thrives in the historic capital of the Jewish people. In addition, in March, President Trump signed a second presidential proclamation recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Naysayers had told generations of presidents that these actions would actually isolate Israel and potentially incite violence against both Israel and the United States. But President Trump saw things differently, and we have all seen the results. A year after our new embassy opened in Jerusalem, Israel has unprecedented relations with our other partners across the Middle East. Prime Minister Netanyahu made his first official visit to the capital of Oman, with little or no response from the Arab street. Israeli athletes, supported openly by their families, won 22 medals at the Special Olympics in Dubai in March. And just last week, the foreign minister of Bahrain, Sheikh Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa, told an Israeli journalist, and I quote now, "Israel is a country in the Middle East. The Jewish people have a place among us." All of this is the result of full, unconditional, and unapologetic support for Israel. In May of last year, we achieved yet another major success in the Middle East. The President announced our withdrawal from the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. The worst diplomatic debacle in American history. And I am here to tell you today, President Trump's maximum pressure campaign against Iran is working. A little over a year ago, our critics predicted we couldn't do it. Our unilateral sanctions, they said, would not be effective. Since then, the United States has levied the toughest ever sanctions on the Iranian regime, and Iran's economy is, to quote the Financial Times, collapsing under their weight. The Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, or IRGC, is starting to have to cut salaries and support for proxies across the region, leaving them to lament the golden days are gone and will never return. And we are just getting started. In November, we finished reimposing the crippling sanctions that had originally brought Tehran to the negotiating table. But we did not stop there, as the President's goal is to get a new deal that would be negotiated in the best interest of the United States. We have also designated the IRGC as a foreign terrorist organization. This is the first time an element of a foreign government has been designated as a foreign terrorist organization. It will make it harder for anyone affiliated with the IRGC to enter our great country. Also makes it a crime for individuals, companies, or institutions to do business with this vile terrorist group. On the anniversary of President Trump's withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, all of the waivers that had been granted on Iranian oil sales have gone to zero. This action is choking off Iran's single greatest source of funding. Like the IRGC terrorist designation, this is an unprecedented step aimed at putting maximum pressure on Tehran to change its threatening behavior. We welcome the action by the British Royal Marines on the 4th of July, no less, to enforce EU sanctions on Syria by seizing a supertanker with millions of barrels of Iranian oil off Gibraltar. That is a real 4th of July present. Actions such as this to disrupt sanctions evasion are critical to denying both the Syrian and Iranian regimes the financial resources they desperately need. We must redouble our cooperation with our allies and partners to enforce our sanctions and enforce freedom of navigation. We are cracking down on other sectors of the Iranian economy, such as metals and petrochemicals, that Tehran was banking on to diversify their revenue streams. The anticipated flood of foreign investment into Iran has utterly failed to materialize, as private companies make the obvious calculation that Iran is a bad bet. German exports German exports to Iran, for example, are down 50% over last year, according to the Association of German Chambers of Commerce and Industry. And as I said earlier this year in Miami, under this administration, no regime that chants death to America or death to Israel will get a deal from this administration. We will continue to increase the pressure on the Iranian regime until it abandons its nuclear weapons program and ends its violent activities across the Middle East, including conducting and supporting terrorism around the world. Tehran's continued pursuit of a nuclear program, including recent increases in uranium stockpiles and enrichment levels, is in direct violation of its commitments under the nuclear deal. It's certainly a grave threat to international peace and security that the deal was supposed to preserve. Given Iran's documented history of pursuing a nuclear weapon, these actions underscore the seriousness of Iran's ongoing nuclear ambitions. President Trump has been clear. He will not allow Iran any path to nuclear weapons. As we pressure the Iranian regime, we also continue to stand with the long-suffering Iranian people, who, as President Trump has said, are the rightful heirs to a rich culture and an ancient land. In every region of the world, the United States seeks partners who are strong, sovereign, and independent. We want nations to take ownership over their own destinies and assume responsibility for peace and security in their own neighborhoods. Importantly, as we encourage our allies and partners to embrace their independence, defend their sovereignty, and invest in their security, we are doing the same here at home. The United States wants the same success for Israel, and we are seeing Israel, fully supported by America, take a new role on the international stage. I witnessed this just 2 weeks ago when I participated in an historic trilateral meeting between the United States and Russia, hosted by Israel in Jerusalem. In discussions with my counterparts, Mayor Ben Shabbat and Nikolai Patrushev, despite our many differences with our Russian friends, one point of agreement stood out, that Israel's security is central to the stability of the Middle East. A strong, independent Israel will only be an ever more valuable partner to the United States. This is what it means to put American interest first. And this is the approach that is finally getting results for the American people, as it will get results for the Israeli people. Finally, a word about an extraordinary event that took place in Jerusalem last Sunday, when Ambassador Friedman and Mrs. Sarah Netanyahu participated in the inauguration of the Pilgrimage Road in the city of David, a remarkable archaeological discovery that provides fresh, scientific, historical proof of the connection between the Jewish people and Jerusalem. Well, I had to be with President Trump at the G20 in Osaka while this ceremony was taking place. I was proud to have the White House represented by Jason Greenblatt, from whom you've just heard. And I visited the city of David many times, most recently for a personal tour and very special dinner with Mayor Ben Shabbat, my Israeli counterpart. This connection between the past and the present, leading into the future, represented by the Pilgrimage Road, is what President Trump instinctively recognized when he promised to move the embassy to Jerusalem on the campaign trail, and what motivated him to make good on his promise. I understand that connection, and I am proud to serve in the administration that has done more to support it than any in history. My friends, our foreign policy progress over the past 2.5 years has been truly extraordinary. We have protected American interests in international forums. We have defended American sovereignty at all costs. We have recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and finally moved our embassy after decades of broken promises. We have withdrawn from the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. We have rejected the failed policies of the past. We have renewed American leadership. We have renewed our partnership with Israel. Thanks to President Trump's bold new approach, all of this was achieved in only 30 months. Imagine what we will accomplish in a second term. It was an honor to speak with you today. Thank you very much.
As America's top diplomat, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has stood strong with Israel and held Iran accountable for its support of terrorism. Secretary Pompeo is a voice for moral clarity on the world stage, a tireless ally to Israel, a bold defender of America's interests around the world.
Thank you for all you did to help get my friend Mike Pompeo confirmed as our new Secretary of State.
It is completely clear the Islamic Republic of Iran is the destabilizing force in the Middle East today.
With the dark wave of anti-Semitism rising in Europe and in the United States, all nations, especially those in the West, must go to the barricades against bigotry.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the United States Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo.
All right, here we go. Here comes the South.
What a wonderful day this is. What a wonderful cadre of speakers we've had. And now it's our privilege and opportunity to hear from the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. As Secretary of State, Secretary Pompeo has played a leading role in shaping American foreign policy, in helping to build respect for the United States of America around the world, and working to ensure its security by standing for America and not apologizing for America. Secretary Pompeo has also strongly and forcefully opposed the disastrous Iran deal. He has worked to strengthen the close relationship between Israel and the United States, which he recently said, quote, has never been more important, end of quote. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and give a warm welcome to a friend of Christians United for Israel, the Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Pompeo.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. They told me there would be a lot of you here. This is what it must have looked like to be part of the crowd for the fishes and the loaves. What a miracle that was. And today I want to talk to you about serious matters and tell some important stories about our path forward. First of all, I want to thank Pastor John Hagee for inviting me to be with you. It is truly heartening as Secretary of State to know that there are so many Americans cheering President Trump's mission to make our relationship with Israel the strongest that it has ever been. You all know Israel is an important partner. It's an ally. Israel is a friend. Can I get an amen? I want to kick off my remarks by telling you something that you already know, but a lot of folks truly don't. Christians in America are among Israel's greatest friends. This isn't a new development. Christian support in America for Zion, for a Jewish homeland, runs back to the early Puritan settlers and has endured for centuries. Indeed, our second president, a couple years back, said, quote, I really wish the Jews, again in Judea, an independent nation, end of quote. And then a little more recently, now just over 100 years ago, 1916, a prominent American evangelist named William Blackstone helped to convince President Woodrow Wilson to support the Balfour Declaration. That was the United Kingdom's own statement of support for, quote, a national home for the Jewish people. That document helped lay the groundwork for what happened in 1948, when a Missouri Baptist displayed an incredible act of political courage. We have to remember these times. It was a world that was recovering from the fury of World War II. People of all nations returning to their homelands. And President Truman wondered aloud to one of his aides. He said, everyone else who's been dragged away from his country has some place to get back to, but the Jews have no place to go. So President Truman, incredibly courageously, decided to recognize this new state. He did so on the very same day its first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, read aloud its Declaration of Independence in Tel Aviv. You know, we take this for granted sometimes, but this wasn't an easy decision for the president. Nearly every one of his advisors, military and diplomatic, had counseled against that decision. But he knew, that president knew, it was the right thing to do. He later said, "I wonder how far Moses would have gone if he'd have taken a poll in Egypt." He continued, he said, "What would Jesus Christ have preached if he'd have taken a poll in Israel? And where would the Reformation have gone if Martin Luther had taken a poll?" It isn't the polls or public opinion of the moment that counts, it's doing what's right and wrong and leadership. You have a president like that today, too. You know, no one was more grateful for Truman's brave decision than the Jewish people themselves. In 1949, Israel's chief rabbi came to see President Truman. He told him, he said, "God put you in your mother's womb so that you could be the instrument to bring about the rebirth of Israel after 2,000 years. And as the story goes, tears filled the president's eyes. The rabbi then opened the Bible and read the words of King Cyrus, a real friend to Israel. It was from the book of Ezra. He read that the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kindness of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. It fills me with unending pride to know that American hands helped build the modern house of Israel. Our welcoming, the American welcoming of the new Jewish state into the family of nations was one of the most consequential diplomatic decisions of the 20th century, not just in terms of the world map, but as a statement to the world of who we are as Americans. It proved, as we continue to prove, that we stand for human dignity, that we stand for justice, that we stand for independence. We're now some 70 years on from that moment. America has an incredibly unique and important relationship with Israel, and it's one that I personally treasure and am proud to work every day to maintain. In May, I had a chance to speak at Israel's Independence Day celebration that was right here in Washington. Ambassador Dermer was kind to invite me and give me a chance to say just a few words. I talked about the unbreakable bonds that stem from our shared love of freedom. You know, modern Israel is the only truly free nation throughout the entire Middle East. It has an enormous respect for religious freedom, a subject of many of our hearts these days. Here too, Israel's commitment lights the way for the rest of the Middle East, and indeed for the entire world. No country is perfect, but Israel, like America, holds itself to an incredibly high standard. Israel is a majority Jewish nation, but the government doesn't force Jewish beliefs on others. Indeed, to the contrary, its Declaration of Independence guarantees the full freedom of conscience, worship, education, and culture. Israel permits the conversion of its citizens away from Judaism, the majority religion. Indeed, last year, the Knesset, their parliament there in Israel, passed a law prohibiting hiring discrimination against workers who refuse to work on their day of rest. Compare this to many places in the world. Compare Israel's reverence for liberty with the restrictions on religious freedom facing Christians and people of all faiths throughout the rest of the Middle East. In many countries, if a Muslim leaves Islam, it is considered an apostasy, and it is punishable indeed by death. In Iraq, Syria, and other countries in the region, the last remnants of ancient Christian communities are at near extinction because of persecution from ISIS and other malign actors. And just one example, before 2003, there were an estimated 1.5 million Christians living in Iraq. Today, sadly, almost 250,000. this administration has made a real effort to protect Christians and other threatened religious minorities in Iraq and elsewhere, and we're making real progress. The flame of existence of Christians must not be snuffed out. Their unalienable rights, Christians' unalienable rights in the Middle East, their right to worship must not be taken away. Persecution of the faithful is especially intense inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. The regime's militant adherence to the noxious tenets of Islamic revolution dictates that all elements of life, and especially the suppression of other faiths. In Iran, if Muslims try to convert non-Muslims, the penal code calls for death sentence. The government does not recognize converts to Christianity. It levies beatings and solitary confinement on Christians caught worshiping in violation of government dictates. Last year, an Iranian court upheld a 10-year prison sentence on 4 Iranian Christians who were acting against national security by, quote, promoting Zionist Christianity, end of quote, and running house churches. This is something we know in America. Instead of following the normal summons procedure, authorities raided their homes, beat them, and used electroshock weapons on them. They then threw them into Evin prison, a regime dungeon inside of Tehran. Every day I pray, and I'd ask you too, to pray for our brothers and sisters in Iran, and not just for them, but people of all faiths who are persecuted there in Iran. You know, I'm from Kansas. And there are, yeah, I love it. I've got Kansan out there. I'm sure there's more of you, just quiet people. You know, a lot of people get spun up with the wrong ideas that American evangelicals want to impose a theocracy on America. I wish they'd be concerned about the real theocratic takeover that has been happening in Iran for the last 4 decades. The Ayatollahs have grievously deprived the Iranian people of that most basic, simple, fundamental right, their right to worship. That same twisted, intolerant doctrine that fuels persecution inside Iran has also led the Ayatollah and his cronies to cry out, quote, death to Israel for 4 decades now. This is similar to a cry that came out of Iran, then called Persia, many, many years ago. The book of Esther teaches us about this. It was in the 5th century BC. There was a wicked advisor named King Xerxes. A fellow named Haman hatched a plot to kill all the Jews in the Persian Empire. He secretly wrote letters with the king's seal to all the provincial governors, ordering the people to rise up and attack the Jews. This edict, once issued, could not be revoked. But thanks to the courageous intervention of Queen Esther, who begged the king to show mercy to her people, Haman's plot was exposed and the Jews were ultimately spared. Today, this marks the Jewish holiday of Purim, and it commemorates this amazing miracle. I wanted to tell this story today for a couple reasons, because similar threats to the Jewish people have marked other eras as well. Think of the Roman devastation of Jerusalem, the vicious pogroms throughout European history, and the Holocaust. The Jews have had a target on their back in every era of history. And as the book of Ecclesiastes says, there is indeed nothing new under the sun. But thank God. Thank God we have a leader in President Trump, an immovable friend of Israel. His commitment, President Trump's commitment is the strongest in history, and it's been one of the best parts of my job to turn that commitment into real action. You know the stories, but we've implemented the strongest pressure campaign in history against the Iranian regime, and we are not done. We've cut off billions in funds that the Islamic Republic of Iran's leadership would have used for various nefarious purposes, not the least of which would have been their efforts to destroy the state of Israel. It is also the case that under President Trump, the Israel haters such as Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad receive far less blood money from Iran to pursue their terrorism than it ever in recent history. President Trump has, too, maintained the $4 billion annual security assistance to Israel. And we've honored Israel's decision to claim the Golan Heights as its own. The Lord did smile on me. I was in Israel the very day that that announcement was made. I was with Prime Minister Netanyahu. My wife Susan and I were able to have dinner with he and his wife the very day of that announcement. It was truly remarkable to be there with this Prime Minister on that day when our President made that historic proclamation. Within the State Department, too, we've elevated the fight against anti-Semitism. It's a conversation I have all the time. Indeed, I had one with the Archbishop of Canterbury last May. I was indeed the first American Secretary of State to ever meet a holder of that office that's existed since the 6th century. I kept thinking during our meeting that the Secretary of State is an old, historic office, and I realized he had about 1,200 years on me. We too at the State Department have advanced religious freedom in our foreign policy. This is something that had been missing for too long. Last year, I hosted the first ever gathering of foreign ministers from all across the world devoted solely to advancing religious freedom, and we'll do it again in the middle of July. And I think we've put the UN on notice, too, that its anti-Israel bias will no longer be tolerated. And while I wasn't there on the day that it happened, I was able to travel now twice to see our embassy, the State Department's embassy, that was moved to Jerusalem to recognize a simple reality of Jerusalem, Israel's capital, now and forever. The other great thing about this administration is we live in a very real world. And for that reason, I was able last March to declare a simple truth that anti-Zionism is indeed anti-Semitism. Period. Full stop. It is also a blessing to stand with other countries like Israel that themselves stand for freedom, because indeed that's what it's all about here in America. You know, I'll close here today. I want to go back to that President Truman, one more time. He said this about America in his memoirs. He wrote the following: "Our country is intended to do all it can in cooperating with other nations to help create peace and preserve peace throughout the world. It is given to defend the spiritual values, the moral code, against the vast forces of evil that seek to destroy them." You know, that's what America does when it stands with Israel each and every day. That's what our state each and every single day. Please know, as this administration works, that I covet your prayers as I do this work. May God bless you, may God bless Israel, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you all so much.